Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our Education Awareness Webinar Series brought to you by Edunity Foundation, G25 and BFM. After about 55 years of independence, there was this realization that the development of Malaysia's education system did not grow in tandem with economic growth or in proportion to the changing demands of education in general. So there was an urgent need to implement progressive change in the education sector to create a generation of Malaysian scholars on par, if not better than the top performing students of our regional peers. A holistic solution was required, which led to the formulation of the Malaysia Education Blueprint 2013 to 2025, which was launched on the 6th of September 2013. This is a large-scale plan to transform the Malaysian public education system with a focus on teacher support, improving core skills among students, accelerating system improvements, and increased operational flexibility. Today, we're going to reflect on this Malaysia Education Blueprint. We've only got about 3 years left to go to 2025. And joining me to help us understand the thinking behind the blueprint and where we have come this far. How far have we actually come? Dato Idris Jala, President and Chairman of PEMANDU Associates. Welcome, Dato Sri. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And joining us also, Chen Trustee at Teach from Malaysia and Senior Partner at McKinsey & Co. Welcome, Kai.
Thank you for having me, Meera.
Okay, I'm going to start with Idris. You were instrumental in dedicating a lab at PEMANDU, specifically for education. Why did you feel so strongly about this at that time, Idris?
Well, education is a very important agenda for any nation. I would say education is the bedrock for a nation's success, because talent, if you have good talent in a country, it's like petrol in a car. If you have a car and you have petrol, then it can move. So it's a very important aspect. What we did, why I thought the labs was useful, was it's a tool that was important, that we bring all the relevant parties together. And we had even the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister visiting the lab. We have the representative from principals, we have teachers, we have representative from parents inside there, we syndicated with students, and we brought experts from outside the country to come there, so that all the ideas were mooted inside there and stress tested. We had McKinsey as well inside the labs. And so we really found a way, we garnered the information, the ideas from everybody to put it. It's such an important agenda. So we thought we had to find a very radical way to get the best thought processes to form it. That's why the labs, we had actually 2 rounds of labs. One was in 2009, and the second round of labs was in 2012. That's when we founded the Malaysian Education Blueprint in the second lab. But the first labs in 2009 was part of the economic or the GTP, and that was when we were the foundation, the precursor for the MEB.
Help us understand, the lab 2 was for the blueprint. What was that lab supposed to be doing?
Well, what we did in the lab was we studied what was implemented since the first round of labs, and we found there were areas that we needed to improve on it. And there were basically, we call them 11 shifts. There are many things that we were prioritizing to work on, but if you take the various shifts and categorize them in 3 main thrusts, one was about access to education, quality education. The second one was about quality. quality of education. The third was about equity, that there needs to be equity in terms of access to it, so everybody in the country needs to benefit from it. Those were the three main ones. But the 11 thrusts were the specific interventions that we needed to address those three main pillars.
Yeah, so equity, access, and quality, the three main things. Yeah. Likai, any reflections on the National Education Blueprint? I mean, we were clear. Were you clear, or were we clear about the what, how, and why for education reform in Malaysia?
I think at the time of the blueprint, just building on what Idris has said in 2012, 2013, there was a very clear burning platform for education reform at the time. Our education system was in nothing less than a crisis. At the time, in terms of international assessments, Malaysia was in the bottom third of countries across reading, math, and science. So we were in the same performance category as countries like Moldova, Ghana, Western Cape and Africa, Botswana, and so on. So we're in the bottom third. We had gone from a ranking of 10th, for example, in TIMSS in 2003, all the way down to the bottom third. We had massive equity gaps. When we talk about equity, quality, and access, there are massive equity gaps in the system. In many ways, where a student was born was a primary determinant of learning outcomes. If you happen to be born in the states like Sarawak, Sabah, or Kedah at the time, chances are your educational outcomes will be much, much worse than if you were born in Putrajaya. So massive equity challenges. In terms of quality, our students were also lagging significantly behind other countries. So in international assessments, again, the average Malaysian 15-year-old student was about 3.5 years behind their peers in Singapore. So in other words, the average 15-year-old Malaysian student was performing at the equivalent of a 12 or 11-year-old in Singapore or in Hong Kong. So there were significant challenges at the time, and I think the labs was a model to take the challenges, take the lessons, take the international learnings, and try to move forward.
Dato Sri, would you agree with Likai? I mean, is it really equity when it comes to where you're born, where you go to school? I mean, you grew up in Barrio in Sarawak. I mean, I think you'd be the best person to actually share with us whether or not inequity is really a huge problem when it comes to geographical locations, access, infrastructure, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's true that you could say that there are a lot of difficulties in rural areas, but it shouldn't be an excuse for not improving the quality. I remember at the time when we were there, we basically didn't have what you have today in many schools. I remember the kids, we really wanted to study. I remember at the time, everybody told me that if you pass your exams, that's your passport to see the world. I wanted to see the town. And if you fail your exams, you cannot come to town. So for me, passing the exam was just life and death. I remember when I finished my Form 3, first time I came to town in Marudi, there were 15 of us who passed our Sarawak Junior exams, and we went to our school in Marudi. I think the first term exams, from number 1 to number 10, they were all from my class. So the town kids wondering where were these kids coming from, because they didn't realize that when we were studying, it was life and death. And if you didn't pass it, it's almost like death. So I think my point is this: despite the hindrances and the difficulties, if the kids really wanted to study and their students or their parents really get them to study, you'll do well. So I always say, yes, it's true, but the government can do what it can to provide as much facilities. But if the students don't want to study, that's the bedrock of it all. I mean, it all begins with the student. Education is nothing more than the student must be the nuclei of the work. Everything else revolves around the student, the teachers, the principal, and we're not stepping back and say, oh, the problem with the curriculum. It really is to do with the students.
Likai, drawing up the Malaysia Education Blueprint, it took a systematic approach, didn't it? Can you help us understand what that process was like? How did you come up with 11 strategic and operational shifts? I mean, they're pretty, I'm looking at all 11, right? It's lovely. You've covered just about everything in this blueprint. how did you come up with it? I mean, what was the approach or understanding?
Yeah. If I understand at the time, similar to how Idris described it, the Ministry of Education, on the basis of the labs, came out with this concept of the 10 shifts. And these 10 shifts were very much built around what are the drivers of improvement. Right? So like Idris was saying, a lot of it is around the students. How do we improve learning outcomes? Students, how do we better support them? It's around schools, it's around principals, it's around the teachers, it's around the efficiency of the system. So the process was, upon reflection, fairly thorough. The Ministry of Education at the time undertook what was, I think at the time, the largest national dialogue conducted across every single state, consulted with tens of thousands of teachers, with parents, with stakeholders, private sector. There were the labs where these strategy initiatives were formulated, wheels were kicked, and so on. And some of the shifts, I think, are quite powerful. Right? So this one of the shifts around transforming teaching into the profession of choice, in terms of how do we make teaching not the profession of last resort, but where our best and brightest, our most energetic, our most motivated professionals are in. There were shifts around how to strengthen the leadership, empower the state education departments, the JPDs, the district education officers, DPDs, to customize solutions. So there was even shifts around how do we empower parents. So parents as a big lever in terms of parental involvement, improving outcomes, supporting their children. So it was meant as upon a close reading of the blueprint, meant as quite a comprehensive reform of the system, from a starting point where we were in crisis.
Idris, which is the biggest lever to actually pull in all of this to get reforms going, education reforms going in this country?
I think there were two in my mind. One is the principal, focusing in the teachers, because everything revolves around what's happening in the classroom. So if the teachers don't do their job every day to teach according to the right teaching methods, and obviously the principal is the person that makes sure they do. So this must happen every single day. But of course, the biggest lever, because the students want to study, they don't want to study, you're gone. But it's really about the teachers. We all have been to school. I'm sure Lika, you all remember the best teachers that you had in your time. You can tell who was a better teacher than the other teacher. I can tell. If I look back, all my teachers, I knew I did well in that class for that particular subject because the teacher was very, very good. So I believe that the biggest lever to pull is the individual teachers. And of course, the person that makes them do it is the principal. So I stick with that simply because if you look today, we have the same curriculum, the same syllabus all across the country. But how come some schools are doing better than others? So you really have to look at it. And you all know when you study that, it's very clear. It's the teachers are doing their jobs well. And obviously the principals are really very, very good and dedicated. That's where the starting point is. I still believe that the classroom is where the biggest lever to pull.
Yeah. I fully agree with that. Right? Because, sorry, I was saying I fully agree with Idris here. I think the quality of teachers and the quality of the teaching is the single biggest factor in terms of student outcomes. And we often talk about the fact that the quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of the teachers in the system. And the only way to improve learning outcomes is to improve instruction in the classroom, or in today's day, in the virtual classroom. But the point is, teaching quality is the single most important factor.
But we have about 400. We have about 420,000 teachers. Now, that's a lot of teachers. So what's wrong? Why is quality of teachers a problem in this country? 420,000 is a pretty big number, would you say?
Yeah, which I mean, I had a session with a guy, Professor Rimmer. Professor Rimmer is from Harvard. He did a lot of research on what is the thing that really kick and make happen for some teachers and not others. This was done international research, and they found the biggest thing that differentiates between the teachers that are good and teachers that are not good is pedagogy, the teaching methods that each teacher uses. So when you look at pedagogy, the way in which the particular teacher teach geography, for example, he does it differently compared to others. They both probably have the same degree, or maybe the same, they went to the same school, they went to the same college, they passed the same exam. One does a better job than the other in the classroom. It's all to do with the teaching methods, the methods that they use. I remember when I was in school, I remember the teachers were doing very different methods, teaching methods. The ones who are doing the ones is effective, you can tell when the person comes in there, is marked improvement in the grades of the students, because the teaching method that's used by such and such a person really is working. So pedagogy is a very important aspect of the 400,000 teachers. So if you pull out the very best teachers for geography, history, and maths, and interview them, show me your teaching methods. Let me codify that so that I can use for the other 400,000 teachers. I can tell you, Meera, we make huge leap and bound progress. That's because it's nothing to do with the curriculum, the same curriculum, but it's the way that particular teacher teaches it.
Yeah. And
Likai, how do we fix this? How do we address this?
And maybe two facts to provide some context, Meera, also to your question around the 400,000 teachers. So we have 400,000 teachers in the system today. That means we have about a student-teacher ratio about 1 to 14, which is already one of the best in Asia. We have one of the best teacher-student ratios in Asia. At the beginning of about 20 years ago, we had about 250,000 teachers in the system. We had a teacher-student ratio about 1 to 20. So we've dramatically increased the number of teachers in the system over a period of 10 years leading up to the blueprint. But we haven't necessarily focused on increasing the quality of either the intake as well as the quality of the pedagogy, like Idris has said, of our teachers. We've got great teachers in the system, but the challenge is about lifting all of them. So one of the things the blueprint highlighted was, prior to the blueprint, in terms of the percentage of teachers who were entering the teacher training institutes, 70% of them had about 0 to 3 A's in SPM. And this is not to say that academic results are the best predictor of teaching quality, no. But 70% of teachers had 0 to 3 A's going into teacher training institutions. I think one of the big shifts as part of Blueprint was shifting towards having at least 70% of the teaching intake had at least 7 A's in SPM. So that was one step in terms of dramatically increasing the quality of our teaching intake. But then with 400,000 teachers in the system, 50% of our teachers will still be teaching for the next 20 years. So then there's a big focus in terms of needing to enhance professional development, providing more support to our teachers to enhance the pedagogy, getting better quality teaching and maybe even better consistency in teaching across schools and in classrooms. I think that will need to be an important focus going forward.
So 50% of our teachers qualified in SPM have 0 to 3 A's. And that's we've got 50%, right? Okay. So how do we up our game? Is that even possible?
Yeah, I think that is the big challenge, right? And I think this is in some ways this is the single biggest lever. And as Idris had pointed out, unless we improve pedagogy, unless we improve quality instruction in classrooms, nothing else that happens at the ministry level, nothing else that happens at the policy level matters. And the most important thing is improving teaching quality. And therefore, thinking through in terms of when we invest in the education system, when we spend, it's not necessarily how much we spend, but where we spend it on. We need to spend, Just?
I want to jump in here. Meera, we don't want these people to get so despondent to listen to us talking about how difficult it is. Let me tell you 3 stories. When I was in government, I visited 3 schools which were among the top 100 high-performing schools. I went to Sri KDU, which is around the corner, and I also went to Sekolah Ulu Lubai. It's a very rural school in the heartland of Sarawak. And I also went to school in PJ, Sekolah Menengah, I think it's Taman Mega. When I met the principal, I spent a day with each of them. I was struck by what was common among them, how they drill a teaching method. And the most startling example was Sekolah Ulu Lubai in Limbang, rural part of Limbang. Huh? The principal is the name of Chigo Jaul. Huh? You know what he said? My teachers are the same quality as all the other teachers in the whole of Malaysia. But every single one of our kids here, they pass our school with flying colors. Up to one standard primary 1, 2, and 3, they all have 100% literacy and numeracy. And I mean, all of them belong to the category Lika talked about. So the question was, what were they doing? You know what time they turn up in the classroom? Everybody come to the classroom, the long house, 7:30 a.m. in the morning. They all brush their teeth. They all drill them to read and write. At lunch times, the parents bring the food to them. Nighttime, they have private study there, and the parents are in the classroom for private study, and the kids are really working. And if, trust me, the whole classroom was littered with accolades. They won so many awards, including Commonwealth Awards for top schools and etc. It was an amazing story. There was this guy, the principal, came to one education seminar, and he told a story. There was one principal from school in Kelantan that said, look, I'm going to send to you 20 of my kids who cannot read and write. Will you take the challenge and put them in Sekolah Ulu Lumbai, and then you teach them using your methods? Challenge accepted. So that they send those 20 Kelantanese kids to the school. I think 2 months later, center all can read and write. Again, teaching methods. Same quality and standard of teachers everywhere amongst the 400,000. So I believe there's tremendous hope if we really take the very simple approach to talk to the principals of this high-performing school. Don't listen to Lika and me. Talk to them. They'll tell you exactly how to do. Because frankly speaking, don't find out how Finland is doing in Norway. Don't go anywhere but talk to the best principals in the school. And if you spend a few days talking to them, you know exactly what needs to be done.
Yeah.
You know, Lika, you've studied so many education systems in the world. And yes, you're right, Idris, a lot of us here look at Finland and Norway and all of that. But is that necessarily what we need to do, Lika?
I think there is a misconception in education reform that we always need to look at certain countries in terms of what's best. And so there's this premise of, look, let's look to Finland, let's look to Singapore, let's look to Estonia in terms of what best practices are. My sense is that in education reform, it's not necessarily about best practice, it's about relevant practice. So for example, as Idris has pointed out, we have great schools. We've got fast improving schools. We've got great teachers and principals in every state and almost every district. We do not necessarily need to look outside. We need to look at inside in terms of where these bright sparks are, where these spots of light are. Let's find out what they're doing, let's replicate it, and let's learn from them. And to your point, Meera, when we look at education system reforms globally, the unfortunate thing is almost every country, every system tries to do education reform. But 70% of education reforms globally fail. And they fail because of a few reasons. Not necessarily because of lack of funding, not necessarily because the plan was bad, but they fail primarily because of two reasons. One is they try to adopt interventions, or they try to adopt reforms, which are not relevant to them. They try to adopt reforms, for example, from Finland or from Singapore, right, which is not relevant to their context. Or systems try to adopt reforms where, because they've been successful in the past, I just keep on doing what we're doing. I just try to replicate what I've done in the past without moving forward, without innovating. Because one of the quite inspiring things when we look at school system reform globally is there is almost a science to school system reform. When you look at the 20 to 30 most improved school systems over the last 15 or 20 years, there is a certain improvement journey that all school systems go through. Every system, irrespective of geography, culture, context, they go from poor performance to fair to good to great to excellent performance. And irrespective of where these systems are, there's a similar cluster of interventions that allow a school system to move from poor to fair. There's a similar cluster of interventions that allow a school system to move from good to great and great to excellent. So the challenge is not about learning from Finland, learning from Norway. It's about identifying where are we on the improvement journey and learning relevant practice, not necessarily best practice. And most of it actually comes from within the system.
Dato Sri, this one is, we have a question from SMI Lee. I think this is perfect for you to answer, Idris. How do we keep politics out of education? 40 years ago, when we were in school education, it was much broader than just studying. It was social skills, sports, appreciation of those who are not like us, different races, religions, were all part of school life. How do we bring this back?
I think what we need to do is focus on improving the quality of education. Today, unfortunately, many of the schools that you see, the national schools, there are only Malays are going there. Very few non-Malays are going to the school. So we almost live a parallel life. So many parents, they're reluctant to send to national schools because they find private schools, some of them are better than them. So I think the quality is the key. Let me return back to a very practical example of what we need to do. I like to tell stories of real people. A few years ago, I think it was 2012, that I went to Sri KDU because they had the best teams results in the country at that time, the best PISA results. So I turned up and met Datin Chen, the principal. And the kids, by the way, they do our national curriculum. They also do the O-levels, the A-levels. They sit for 2 exams and they all pass. Now, so I asked Datin Chen, what's the secret? When I entered the room, there were books that line up the whole conference table from one end to the other end. He said, I want you to look at the books. He said, these are the books that we use for teaching methods. So every school term, every teacher in the school must come to the classroom for 2 weeks to prepare for the lessons for the next term. 2 weeks. Every day to prepare, to follow these books. So if you are teaching maths, day 1, this is what you do. Day 2, this is what you do. And you follow this curriculum, the teaching methods. So if they don't pass the standard that they put to them during the 2 weeks to prepare for the term, they extend it for a further week. So you can see the preparation needed in the class before the term begins was excruciating. And this is the reason why the grades, the kids come out from the school is better than most. And if you talk to Datin Chen, you know what you say? The salaries of our teachers the same as the rest. The quality of our teachers the same as the 400,000. But the reason why they're doing well, we insist that they follow these teaching methods, chapter by chapter, in the classroom every single day for the whole term. And that is how it should be. And this is no rocket science. So I sincerely believe that if there are any government people that listens to this podcast, etc., I really want to go and talk to the principal of this 100 high-performing schools, robustly find out what they're doing, and then really try to see how we'll apply this across the schools in Malaysia.
Satina Said Saleh is asking the ratio of 1 to 14 between teachers and students, but are they really assigned in the classroom to teach? Is that a problem, Lee Kai?
I think there is a difference between the teacher-student ratio and the class sizes. I think, as if I recall in the blueprint, although we have a very good teacher-student ratio of 14 students per teacher across Malaysia, the contact instruction hours of teaching is less than 3 hours a day for the average student. This is not to say that the teacher workload is light. Teaching workload is heavy. A lot of that, of course, is admin, is preparation work, and so on. So I think, is it Dato Satina? Is it in terms of the question around? Yes. Although we have a large number of teachers in the system compared to student ratio, the issue is not necessarily the number of teachers. But the research is also showing is school systems that are performing well don't necessarily optimize, they don't necessarily have small class sizes. In fact, school systems that do well often compromise on class sizes. They have smaller number of teachers, they have slightly larger class sizes, because then they can compensate the teachers better, they can have higher quality teaching cohorts in the system, and they can provide limited resources to support these teachers.
What about autonomy, Idris? Do you think schools are empowered to, take into consideration who their students are, look at all the different moving parts independently to make decisions? As you said, principals to you in terms of leadership are right on top. So are the principals empowered?
Absolutely. No government in the world, no, including Malaysia, is preventing them from developing teaching methods that are effective in the school. They're totally empowered. So when I met all the principals, the government is not telling Cikgu Jala to do what he's doing. The government is not stopping Madam Koo, who's in Taman Mega, to do what she's totally empowered to do that. So the key here is that picture a constellation. There are 4 planets there, or 3 planets. The sun is the student. There are 3 other planets revolving around that sun. The principal, and the teacher, and the parent. There are 3 people. So the parent must make sure that kids study at home and finish homework. Sit there every single night to make sure they do the homework. My father used to do that with me when I was in school. Every night. And then I cannot walk away without finishing that, because he was my teacher too in the classroom. My father was the teacher. So I had no choice, that I had to make sure that I finished all my homework. Then the principal making sure that the teachers do their job. The teachers follow the curriculum and make the teachers accountable for the outcomes. So those three planets that revolve around the sun, which is the student, the principal, the teachers, and the parent. And if you do that, that's how it's going to work. We all know those not make life difficult, actually. Likai and I know, you remember, Likai, when we were in government, I wanted the government to rank all the schools in Malaysia, all the 10,000 primary school and 9,000 secondary school, and we rank every single one of them on the basis of student outcome, the results of the student, and we put them from number 1 to number 10,000. We want to publish them, so the government eventually agreed to publish them in bands. Band 1 means the best, band 7 is the worst. So we publish them. I can tell you, because we know by subject, which teacher is responsible for the kids who are doing very poorly in geography and history for every school. Then you focus on the teacher lah. You don't look at other teachers. So you look at the grades of the student over a prolonged period of time. So the principal must focus on the teachers, make them accountable for the outcome. By the way, we did that for 3 years. Actually, the results were astounding. A big improvement in the outcome. But people, after 3 years, the government abandoned the whole idea of ranking the schools in that way and publishing the bands. It's sad. I do believe that doing that is causing a silent revolution to take place, because you then hold the teachers accountable, subject by subject, class by class, and you put them directly on the pedestal for all to see. And this, I think, the starting point for how to improve. For example, if you say one particular school, everybody is poor in mathematics, then you start drilling down the data in that school. You realize that you don't have good mathematics teachers. What do? Then you bring teachers from outside to go and replace those teachers. That's how you're going to use the data, analyze the data. But if you stop doing the ranking, you stop putting it up for scrutiny, then you almost have little data intelligence to move forward.
Yeah. Likai, can you talk to us about...
Approach. Yeah, Meera, I think this, if I may, this data-driven approach is absolutely vital in school system reform. Because what data allows us to do is take a differentiated approach to school system reform. So, for example, the concept of one size fits all. Every school does the same. But one policy for all just doesn't work for school system reform. So what data allows us to do is to say, look, what are the unique challenges that each school is facing? Which schools are underperforming schools? Which schools are struggling? Which schools are doing well? Which schools are doing better? And then that allows us to target our interventions, right, for each school, each district. So for example, schools that are struggling, they're declining, they're not doing that well. These schools need more support, not less. The schools on the Pro to Fair journey, they need more scaffolding. They need more support for teachers who are perhaps demotivated or undertrained. They need to set minimum standards. They need more support, whether it's in math and so on. They need more prescriptive support. they need support to get kids back into school. Whereas a school who's performing really well, schools who are thriving, who are improving, who are already some of the best schools in the world, these schools, we can largely step back as a system, basically allow them to flourish. And then the role of the ministry or the center is then, how do I identify best practices in these well-performing schools, codify and disseminate? How do I encourage schools to collaborate? So it's a very differentiated approach depending on how schools are doing. And then back to your point about autonomy. I'm a big believer in this concept of earned autonomy in school system reform. And earned autonomy as in, as you improve, schools get greater autonomy as you get better. A school which is struggling with teachers who are demotivated, students aren't showing up, those schools need much more support, much more resources, not less. And so the concept of earned autonomy based on how schools are performing.
All of this sounds so wonderful. So then brings me to the question by Si Chuang Tuan. How successful have we been with the implementation of the blueprint, and what outcomes have we achieved, Idris? PEMANDU was at one point looking at performance management. Till you were left off, how have we done?
When in the first 3 years, when we were doing the school ranking, there was a 75% improvement in band 6 and 7, the worst performing school. 75%. There were reduction because they migrated to become, school in three band 4. And then the increase in the band 1 and 2, there was a nearly 47% increase in the schools in the band 1 and 2. There was a massive shift. Meera, if you are principal in school at band 7, and you are the principal for 10 years for that school, and they publish you at band 7, the parents are going to come to you, said, Meera, how come our school is doing so badly? And you can't tahan. You will have to do something about improving the quality and the standards of your kids. I call that a silent revolution was taking place because we were putting the feet as close to the fire as possible. So there were a lot of improvement. I can give you some on access. Access, preschool shifted from 6 to 7% in 2009, and the access improved to 87% by 2019. And then primary school access 96%, right, jump up to 98.1% in 2019. Lower secondary school, 91% access to 95.8% in 2019. And upper secondary school, 81% in 2012, jumped to 88.8% in 2019. So access, some improvement. The quality was very varied. That's the problem that I have here. Of course, you can cite examples that UM's ranking has shifted in the QS ranking from number 200 in the year 2010, it jumped to what it is among the top 100 from among the there to there. And so for PISA results, we have moved up from the bottom 30% to the middle 30%. So there's been improvement in on the PISA results for the period from the time when we started up to 2019. So yes, we have been having some improvement. There was some improvement in equity, and I have the data there, and I will not read them to you. But my point is this: those data that I cited there, not nearly enough to satisfy us, because we all want our kids to be far better than we are before. And the reality today is that the other countries are also making huge improvement. So if you're running so hard, and when you open your eyes, some of your other competitors are running even faster than you. You're behind. So I remember a book that I read for Saroyan's book called My Name is Aram. In that book, the little boy that ran inside that book closed his eyes. And he swore to God that when he opened his eyes, he will be number one. When he opened his eyes, he is last. So this book by Saroyan, in the book of My Name is Aram, we must open our eyes to what's happening outside beyond our shores. You may be running fast, we may be improving, but remember other countries may be running even faster than us. So therefore, measuring ourselves by ourselves, looking at our own standard, is not good enough. It has to be compared with other countries are moving at a much faster pace. So I think we have made some progress without doubt, but the question is it at the pace that is beating the competition? And the answer is Not yet.
You know, Jaco Vadaketh is asking, there's been an exodus of children from our national schools, as you mentioned, to private schools or even vernacular schools during the time of the blueprint. Do you think the blueprint has failed? And that's one of the objectives.
I think the objective is correct. The reality is that this problem that we've had was a problem that's been there for quite a long time. You know, it takes a long time to make the change in moving it forward. I cited you some examples, but you can find anecdotal evidence to show that, yeah, you know, we are not doing well. We made some progress, but I do agree that people expect something even better. Parents, as I said, want the best for their kids. No parents want substandard quality education. If I know there are two schools, one school is better for my kids, I'll put them there, you know. So if it's a vernacular school, it's not a private school that's better in the same area, I'm going to put them there. So nobody is going to say, just for national pride, I'm going to put my kids in national school, knowing very well there's a private school that's in the vicinity that I could send my kids there. And if I can afford it, I will send them there. So really, the key here today is that the schools, they themselves must compete with the private schools. So they must be better than the private school, although they are making improvements. But you must remember, if the private school are making better improvements than them, that's part of the competition, you know.
Yep. Lika, how do you think we can restore confidence in national schools?
Well, I think similar to what Idris is saying, right? Have we as a country made progress in the national education, national schools the last 8 years? Yes. Has the progress been as fast as all of us would have liked? No. Has COVID, for example, in the current context, exacerbated things? Definitely yes. And we talked about access, quality, and equity. Access, Malaysia is actually doing reasonably well. We have almost universal enrollment. In terms of one of the big outcomes of the last several years is our preschool enrollment. Has gone up from 65% to almost around 90%, if I recall, which is one of the biggest jumps we've seen globally in a period of less than a decade. But when we look at equity, with equity, we think about socioeconomic achievement gaps. We think about urban-rural gaps. We think about gender gaps, for example. In the last year and a half, with school closures, with so on, I think as we return to school, we will have an even bigger challenge in terms of how do we solve for equity. Idris rightly pointed out that other countries are moving ahead, moving fast. We also have another challenge now, which is how do we close this gap in terms of learning loss or unfinished learning. So there's an added challenge for education reform in Malaysia. And so to the point around the national schools, at the end of it, the blueprint sets out quite an inspiring aspiration. We want to make national schools a school of choice, raise the quality of teaching, raise the quality of pedagogy, make national schools the most attractive option in terms of for all Malaysians. That's very inspirational. I think we talked a bit about earlier in terms of how do reforms get ignited. You need a clear case for change, a burning platform. You need strong political will. You need a clear aspiration, clear targets, and clear commitment. But I think there's also an aspect of how do you sustain the energy, how do you sustain the reform beyond ignition. And when you look at global reforms that have succeeded, and they're not many, only about 1/3 of global education reforms succeed. Often it comes down to a few things. It comes down to beyond the policies. Are we embedding new practices at the classroom level? Are we providing support, not just accountability, but also support? Number two, are we strengthening the middle layer, the leadership at the middle? Are we strengthening the leadership, in Malaysia's case, at the state education departments, at the district education departments, because they are so much more closer to the school where the action is, where the important things happen, not necessarily the ministry. And number three, of course, are we architecting the leadership to sustain these reforms? One of the key observations of successful school reforms globally is continuity of educational leadership. Often it takes about 5 to 6 years for an educational cycle to see its way through. So continuity of leadership in terms of being able to sustain, to maintain the reforms for a period of 5 to 6 years is absolutely critical and often quite vital for outcomes. So
Idris?
We talk a lot about how, but we also need to talk about how do we sustain.
Idris, let's talk about leadership. Our ministers come and go. Many of them want to lay their, they want their legacy, right, to be known. They come in, they change things, they go out, the next minister comes in, changes things. Your thoughts on leadership? I'm sure you've seen enough of that.
Yeah, I think the key here is that if there are change in government, change in leadership, don't start looking at changing the blueprint. There's nothing wrong with the blueprint. So make sure that you don't change the blueprint. Look for ways to ask the question, why is the implementation not working as well? Focus on the implementation. Find the areas where shortcoming. Try to solve the problem of implementation. That is the key. So leaders, in my view, are leaders, and they call them leaders, that they intervene by rolling their sleeve to solve problems. If you're not solving problems, then you're not there. So I make life very simple. Rank all the schools. You know which school is not doing well. Tell them they are in band 1 and band 6, band 7. And then you now focus on the schools, as Likai pointed out, or band 6 and 7. Ask the principal, what are you doing? The teachers, in which class? So the starting point must always begin in the classroom with the teachers, the principal, and the parents. So everybody else around it are to help those people make it work. So if the principal say, I don't have any proper maths teachers in my class, then the person who's responsible in Putrajaya and also in the state, bring a good maths teacher and put there. It's not a theoretical thing. It's a very serious thing. So if you don't analyze data, you're operating blind. So I think, to me, analyzing the data for every school, making sure they use data analytics to make the right choices. That's where it begins. Always, as I mentioned, if there's one thing I want people to remember in this discussion, the action begins in classroom, not the state, not the district, not Putrajaya. It's in the classroom with the kids who are at the center of it all, the principal and the teachers and the parents. I can tell you, there are many parents who know that the teachers are not doing a good job. You know what do? They send the kids for extra classes. They go send them for tuition. And this is the way in which they solve the problem, because they're now taking the law in their hands. I can tell you there are a lot of parents who spend a lot of money because they realize that things are not really happening in the classroom. So I think, to my mind, making the teachers are wholly accountable to student outcome is very important. And you cannot do that until you publish the outcome of the student ranking. I would say today, let's not complicate matters. Again and again, I say, go and find out what the top 100 schools are doing, record it down. I guarantee you they're not rocket science. And insist that every school follow the same kind of routine to make sure that they get the outcome. If you do that, I think you will get results in no time. You don't need many, many years to see improvements. They can be very, very quick.
Yeah, but Idris, we have a problem now. There is, sorry, just 1 second. There's no more UPSR. It's been removed. How do we assess these schools and put them in bands?
I totally disagree with this, and I completely disagree. I'm old school. I don't believe that our system is ready for that kind of what they do in Finland and Norway. We're not reached that level yet. So we really need exams that are robust, because if you don't do that, everybody will assess themselves to be top of the notch. I can tell you, one of my sons, I worked in Sri Lanka for 3 years. And I sent one of my boys to an American school there. When we finished there, we then moved to the UK. Everybody was telling me, no exams, everything was perfect, everything was good, and all the things were good. When we went to the UK, then we realized my son was way behind. Way behind. So I can tell you, my own kid, I had one son that went through this. It was a very painful thing. I had to sit with him and teach him British history. I have never studied British history before in my life. And so we had to go down and teach him because there were 2 years of catching up. So to my mind, it is absolutely critical that we really take these bulls by the horn. And we cannot, I do not believe, I totally reject the notion that we free-wheeling this nation, we allow our kids to do what the school to do what they like, no more public exams. I can tell you, I'm going to bet with anybody, few years down the road, we will see this is a misadventure, big time.
Likai, sorry, I interrupted you.
I was going to build on 2 points that Idris made. One was this point about identifying which are the best schools, whether this is through assessment results, exam results, or otherwise. I think this is important point because this is not just about learning from the best schools, but which are the most improved schools. Because not every school has the same context, the same resources, but if we use the data to find out which are the most improved schools across the country, and schools can learn from those schools, I think that would be really, really powerful. And the most improved schools as well as the best schools. The other point Idris raised, which I'd like to also build on, is he talked about leadership. And I think when we talk about leadership in school system, this is not just at the minister level. This is critical roles at the ministry level, at the state level, at the district level, and then of course at the school level. As highlighted in the blueprint, 80% of our principals are 50 years old and above. About 40% of principals retire within 4 years. That's a very similar situation across many critical leadership roles across the ministry. So there is a critical need, I think, to look more carefully at succession planning, so that leaders at the school level, at the district, at the state, at the ministry level have the continuity and the runway to really sustain these reforms.
And we have a question here from Melissa Stephen, precisely on getting relevant practices. Why are we hiring and allowing incompetent teachers to teach?
I just remember there was one particular thing that we did when I was in government. This is public knowledge, and so it was okay. We had 70,000 teachers who teach English in our school, 70,000. We managed to get every single one of them to sit for the Cambridge placement test to see how many of them are really proficient to teach English. Actually, 70% of them did not pass the satisfactory standard. And that's sad. But you know them by name. So it's not a theory. So what was needed was a program to get those 70% of them name by name. They had to go for remedial classes, weekend classes, to make sure that they improve the quality of their English. Because if your English is not good, and you're not passing the Cambridge placement test, then you really have difficulty teaching the kids. So to my mind, this is not an immediate thing that you can solve, but we have to be daring enough to say, which teacher is not making the mark. It cannot a theory. You cannot say, oh, everybody is. You must say name by name which particular teacher, and then you send them for remedial classes. So the 70,000 teachers who are teaching English, and that we put them to the test, that was a very robust approach to identify the teachers that needed remedial work. So if you are leadership, so you have to be prepared to take very robust approach like that.
Isabel is asking, what are we doing about inclusion in schools? And that's one of the shifts, isn't it? Unity in schools. How do you think we're doing in that area?
You're asking me, Likai.
I'll come to you in a while, Idris. Okay, go ahead, Idris.
You can take the tough questions, Idris.
I always believe, I can tell you, education, the purpose of education is not to unite people. The purpose of education is to educate people. That's primary. So if you put that the primary thing that we needed to do, secondarily, we can then say it can unite people. We must begin by saying quality education is paramount. I can tell you, if you have the best school, the best student outcome in there, Every parent wants to send their kids there, whether they're Indian, whether Kalabit, whether even Chinese. We all want to send our kids there. So you focus on quality, and naturally the unity will come in there. Because the quality is not so good, then they start looking at options that's available for them. Options available means there are two schools in a neighborhood. One is a private school. It's a better school. I'm sending my kids there. That's the problem. If all choices are given to parents. Now, if you are a parent in a rural school, there are private schools there. They have no choice. And so when you are in town, you have choices. So government must remember that if you want to make a shift, so the unity aspect of it will be fulfilled, you must focus on improving the quality of education in that school so that the parents will then make that the choice, regardless of race and religion.
Question from Malik. Would NUTP allow teachers to prepare for the term by spending 2 weeks in their holiday period to prepare for the school term?
That's a tough call. This is exactly why if you are a leader, minister of education, then I think you should allow this kind of things to happen. And so it's a very good question, Malik. I really believe that's why leadership is leadership. I remember when I was in Harvard, I met this guy called Martin Lindsay. He says when you do transformation, you're going to do some things that are tough. People don't like it. So he says transformational leadership is about disappointing people at a rate they will permit you to. So meaning to say that they will not clap hands if you ask them to come for 2 weeks to the classroom to prepare. But if you explain the reasons why you're doing it and they understand it, they are still disappointed with you, but they will still come. They're not on riot, they're not on strike, they accept it. That's what Datin Chan is doing. Datin Chan is saying, look, I want the school to be the best. We all agree the school to be the best. But if we want to be the best school in PISA and TIMSS, and this is what we needed to do, that's what leadership is all about, convincing the teachers that it's in their interest, it is in school interest that they come. And so that's what leadership is about, disappointing people at the rate they'll allow you to.
Let's talk about differentiated learning, Likai. The pandemic has come and, as you said, the gap has widened between the have and have-nots when it comes to education. All children have actually lost out. I think in Malaysia, we've lost out 8 months of school. 80% of classroom time has been lost. How do we fix this? I mean, is differentiated learning a far-fetched idea, and will that ever happen in this country?
I think differentiated learning is an approach that is necessary. But I think, in terms of addressing the unfinished learning and the learning loss coming out of the pandemic, I think we need to do much more. This cannot be a business as usual. Kids go back to school, once admissions rates are low, and we go back to exactly normal as it was in 2019. Our children have gone through periods of schooling where they have not had social interaction, they've fallen behind. Some of the research in some countries, like in the US, for example, are saying that the average child is about 4 or 5 months behind. But from disadvantaged communities, they're 6-7 months behind. And that's in the US, where they have not had as much school shutdowns as we have. And if you think about failure being cumulative, we are going back to school in an environment where a lot of our children have not been in school for, as you pointed out, many, many months. The learning is behind. This is no longer about targeted remedial. Do we need to start taking more systemic action? And so it's not about remedial teaching. Every teacher needs to have remedial expertise. Class needs to be a remedial class. Do we rethink our curriculum, at least for the next few years, for this particular cohort? So focus on a more targeted set of learning outcomes, because we just cannot make up for the last 2 years, so we need to adapt. And it's not just about differentiated teaching, differentiated support for schools. And so is there something about thinking about a new mantra? Maybe let's call it so for example, the concept of improvement. We don't expect every school to reach the same standard. We may not expect every child, every school to reach the same before the pandemic. But what we can't compromise on is we need every state to improve. We need every district to improve. We need every principal, every school, every teacher, every class, every student to improve every year going forward. It's about improvement. And I think that is, in some ways a core principle for how do we come out of the pandemic and restore us on the trajectory of improvement.
Idris, education gets the largest pie.
Sorry, Meera.
Okay. That's all right. Education gets the largest pie of the country's annual budget, and we're looking forward to that budget next month. How much is enough, Idris? And is there really an ROI to this?
Well, I mean, there's never enough money for anything, but I think here's prioritization. How do you spend that money on? Where do you put it on? So I think with the limited resource that we have, if you focus it exactly as I said, in the classroom, exactly among the teachers, that does not spend money. You can talk to the 100 high-performing schools, they will tell you this does not require lots of money from government. Facilities are the same as than elsewhere. Sekolah Ulu Lubai gets flooded twice a year. And how come the schools in Limbang, Sekolah Lubai is better than the rest? And so really, when I think about it, if you start looking at the classroom, what is happening there, that does not require a lot of money. So I'm an optimist, but with the limited resource, focusing in the classroom is key. And so that's very, very, very important. Yeah. I do return to the earlier question about the divide. What happened to rural school relative to urban schools because COVID-19? I totally agree. Across the world, the rural schools are badly hit compared to urban school only because of one thing, the digital divide. And that is a big problem because if you have to teach people remotely, you need to have better connection on internet. And, if that is not there, and it's very difficult to do. I can tell you in this generation, people who are listening here, they're wondering, when I joined the red race in 1982, there was no PowerPoint. There was no spreadsheet. There was no email. There was no Zoom. So the world was vastly different when I started working in 1982. And so what the world today is that anything you want to learn today is on YouTube. So today I find people giving excuses for not improving. I always find that difficult to stomach because there's so much you can learn today at your fingertips. So I still believe that there's tremendous avenue for people, even the period of this lockdown, to really learn on certain things. If my kids were still going to school, I would have spent the whole of last year and this year spending my time teaching them whatever was they're missing in the 8 months. I'm convinced if I did that, I think they would have been doing far better than they went to school. But I had to take the responsibility to go through and search and Google everything that's available on the internet to teach them. That's because they're not going to classrooms. So I think if you figure out, you see in my background, you see a guitar there. I have learned during this period of time how to weld guitar, how to make guitars on my own. And now I bought the neck from Mexico. I got the body from China. I got the electronics, the parts from US, and I assemble it all because I learned from the internet. You don't need to go to a classroom on guitar making. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for us to use this time to learn new skills. So I believe that the best part of what we live in today's generation is that learning is at your fingertips.
But we need to address that digital divide badly. And ICT was something that ICT was outlined in the blueprint. This is way back in 2013. I mean, so, I think in conclusion, it seems that the blueprint is a practical, good document, right? I don't think we want to dispute that there are many flaws in it, but it's obvious that the implementation of it hasn't worked very well at all. Lika, what will be the top 3 things that you would hope for in terms of implementation going forward?
If I had a wish list and top 3 priorities, number 1 goes back to your point earlier about the budget. It's not necessarily, yes, we can never spend enough on education, but we consistently spend as a country 2% more budget on the education system, which in some ways is a strong sign of commitment. But with 70% of the budget going to teacher salaries, the question is, what do we spend the 30% on? So one key thing would be can we make sure that we're spending on the right things? We're spending on things that really move the needle in terms of teaching quality, professional development, lifting classroom instruction. Number two, are we focusing on strengthening the leadership? Are we focusing on succession planning, supporting our leaders, not necessarily at the ministry level, also at the state level, at the district level, but also very importantly, the school leadership, the principals, the penolong ganans and so on, number two. And number three, this concept of about data. We keep going back to data. Data allows us to differentiate intervention. Data allows us to identify which schools need help and what type of help. It allows us to deliver support, and allows us to deliver accountability. If there were three priorities, those would probably be my wish lists.
Idris?
Number one, focus on the implementation. Don't change the blueprint. Number two, reinstate the ranking of all schools and publish them in bands so that you can analyze the data for the schools that are not performing well, etc. Number three, focus on interventions that are coming from the ranking in the school so that you improve the quality. That's very simple. And it's not rocket science. So if you look at the school, they're not doing well, focus. And then when you start doing that, you will know at the center of the work is in the classroom for that particular school, for that particular subject. No rocket science. And I can tell you, if you do that, I can tell you it's not about money. It's not about money. It is all what's happening in every single day. The teachers must do their job in the classroom every single day, following the curriculum, following the teaching methods. And if they don't, the principal will check them. And if they're not rating the result, the parents will say, you're not getting results, you are still band 7. And you still do that. And because if you do all these things, three things I just described, the Premier League has just started in the UK. Yeah? If you are the coach or manager of a team and you keep losing, I can tell you they'll sack you. And so I think there's an element that you have to hold people accountable for outcomes. So there's no cop-out in my mind when it gets down to quality education, because the biggest thing that you can do, gift that you can do to a child, is to give quality education.
Idris, we're rooting for you to be Minister of Education. Would you consider it?
No. No, thank you.
Would you?
I can give them input.
Would you consider it?
I've been there, Rila. So my point is that I'm totally prepared to give input. And anytime, any day, anybody want my help, I'm there to help. There's no point about being a minister, and I've been there. I mean, it will be a great idea, but all you need to do is to empower the teachers, empower the classroom to do it quite like that. And so I think rocket science is there. My boss in Shell once said to me, Idris, the biggest lesson that we can learn is this: the graveyard is full of indispensable people.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Dato Sri Idris Jala, President and Chairman of PEMANDU Associates, and Chen Kai, Trustee at Teach for Malaysia and Senior Partner at McKinsey & Co. Now, we will continue this education series on Monday, this coming Monday, the 13th of September at 6 p.m. with Dato Dr. Habiba Abdul Rahim, former Director General of Education, and Khadija Abdullah, former CEO of PADU, where we will explore the implementation of the National Education Blueprint. Thank you again, gentlemen, and thank you all for joining us this evening.